A don like no other in the shadowy world of the American Mafia, tradition was everything. Omertà, the code of silence, was sacred. Bosses preferred anonymity, ruling from the shadows while politicians and businessmen acted as their front men. But one man broke that mold. One man stepped out of the darkness and into the spotlight and paid the price for it. That man was Joe Colombo, the flamboyant head of New York's youngest crime family. He was equal parts gangster, businessman, and activist, a man who dared to challenge not only the FBI, but also the very traditions of Cosa Nostra. His story is one of power, ambition, betrayal, and a shocking downfall that shook the Mafia to its core. This is the story of the Colombo Crime Family and the rise and fall of Joe Colombo. Born in Brooklyn in 1923, Joseph Colombo Sr. grew up in a working-class Italian-American neighborhood. His father was part of the Profaci crime family, the precursor to what would later bear Joe's own name. From an early age, Joe saw how respect, fear, and money flowed from the Mafia lifestyle. But unlike many mobsters, Colombo had a knack for mixing charm with ruthlessness. He started as a soldier, collecting debts, running rackets, and working closely with Joseph Profaci, the powerful but unpopular boss of the family. Profaci was known as the Olive Oil King, running his family like a business empire while taxing his men heavily. Resentment brewed, and young Joe Colombo learned quickly that loyalty in the mob was often just a mask for survival. By the early 1960s, Colombo had risen through the ranks, proving himself not just as an earner, but as a mediator. He was trusted, well-spoken, and smart enough to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. When Profaci died in 1962, a power struggle tore the family apart. Into this chaos, Colombo stepped forward. With the backing of the Commission, the Mafia's ruling council, he was named boss. And so the Colombo crime family was born. Joe Colombo inherited a fractured organization, but he moved fast to consolidate power. He tightened control over unions, construction, trucking, and the New York docks, making the family a force to rival the older, more established families like the Gambinos and Genoveses. He was also a man who understood the power of visibility. While most bosses worked from behind closed doors, Colombo didn't shy away from attention. He shook hands with politicians, smiled for photographs, and even gave interviews. To the FBI, this was infuriating. To rival bosses, it was reckless. Inside the family, one man stood out: Joseph "Crazy Joe" Gallo. Charismatic, unpredictable, and dangerously ambitious, Gallo had already earned a reputation for violence. His presence kept Colombo's reign anything but peaceful. Behind the glitz and smiles, the Colombos were a family built on extortion, loan sharking, hijackings, and blood. In 1970, Joe Colombo made a move that stunned not just the underworld, but America itself. He founded the Italian-American Civil Rights League, an activist organization that staged protests against what Colombo called unfair treatment of Italian Americans. At the time, movies, newspapers, and even the FBI openly used the word mafia. Colombo demanded it stop. He claimed that Italian Americans were being unfairly stereotyped as criminals. While running one of the most powerful crime syndicates in New York, the League held rallies in Columbus Circle, drawing tens of thousands. Politicians attended, cameras rolled. Joe Colombo, the mafia boss, became Joe Colombo, the civil rights leader. But not everyone was impressed. The FBI saw it as a publicity stunt. The Commission, led by bosses like Carlo Gambino, saw it as dangerous. Mafia bosses were supposed to stay invisible, not call press conferences. Colombo's hunger for the spotlight was breaking every rule in the book, and soon he would pay for it. June 28, 1971, Columbus Circle, New York City. The Italian-American Civil Rights League was holding its second annual rally. Thousands of people filled the square, waving flags and chanting slogans. At the center of it all stood Joe Colombo, the man who had made himself the face of Italian-American pride. But then, in a split second, the celebration turned into chaos. As Colombo prepared to take the stage, a lone gunman pushed forward. Shots rang out. Colombo collapsed, blood pouring from his head. The shooter, identified as Jerome Johnson, was immediately gunned down by Colombo's bodyguards. Miraculously, Joe Colombo survived, but he would never recover. The bullet left him in a coma-like state, paralyzed and unable to speak. He lingered for years, a broken man who had once been one of the most powerful bosses in America. Theories swirled. Some said Crazy Joe Gallo had orchestrated the hit. Others believed the Mafia Commission ordered it, tired of Colombo's reckless publicity. The truth has never been definitively proven. What is certain is that from that day forward, Joe Colombo's reign was over. With Colombo incapacitated, chaos consumed the family. Crazy Joe Gallo, recently released from prison, made his move. The streets of Brooklyn erupted in a bloody war between rival factions of the Colombo family. Restaurants, bars, and sidewalks became battlegrounds. In 1972, Joe Gallo himself was assassinated in spectacular fashion at Umberto's Clam House in Little Italy, shot dead while eating dinner with his family. The hit shocked New York, cementing the Gallo Wars as one of the bloodiest internal conflicts in Mafia history. The violence weakened the Colombos, leaving them vulnerable to law enforcement and rival families. For the next decade, they would struggle with instability, betrayals, and FBI infiltration. To understand why Colombo's fate was sealed, we need to look back at the Mafia's origins. In 1931, Lucky Luciano had created the Commission, a governing body designed to prevent senseless wars between families. The rules were simple: keep peace, share profits, and above all, keep a low profile. Joe Colombo had broken that last rule spectacularly. His league rallies, his interviews, his bold attacks on the FBI, all of it put too much heat on the Mafia. Bosses like Carlo Gambino and Tommy Lucchese valued discretion. Colombo valued headlines. And in Cosa Nostra, when you broke the rules, there was always a price. While Joe Colombo lay incapacitated, the family's younger generation was rising. Among them was Michael Franzese, the son of feared underboss Sonny Franzese. Michael would go on to run one of the most lucrative scams in Mafia history, the gasoline tax fraud. By manipulating fuel taxes and using phantom companies, Michael and his partners stole hundreds of millions of dollars, funneling it back into the Colombo family's coffers. For a time, it was the most profitable racket in the entire American Mafia. Michael's rise showed that while Joe Colombo's reign had ended in violence, the family itself was far from finished. The 1970s and 80s were a turning point for law enforcement. Using new tools like the RICO Act and undercover operations, the FBI went after the Mafia like never before. One of the most famous was Operation Donnie Brasco, in which FBI agent Joe Pistone infiltrated the Bonanno family for 6 years. His success proved that even the most secretive criminal organizations could be penetrated. For the Colombos, constant infighting and high-profile crimes made them an easy target. Dozens of members were arrested, convicted, and sent to prison. The once powerful family that Joe Colombo had built was now fractured and under siege. Joe Colombo died in 1978, never having recovered from the bullets that ended his reign. His funeral was modest compared to the grand send-offs of other mob bosses, reflecting a man who had once reached for the stars but fallen into disgrace. Yet his legacy is unique. Colombo was the only Mafia boss to openly challenge the FBI and organize political protests. He blurred the line between gangster and activist, creating a paradox that still fascinates historians today. To some, he was a visionary who tried to protect his community. To others, he was a reckless egomaniac whose hunger for attention brought ruin to his family. The price of spotlight. The story of Joe Colombo is a cautionary tale. In the Mafia, silence was survival, but Colombo craved the spotlight, and in the end, that spotlight became his executioner. He built a family from the ashes, stood at the peak of power, and tried to rewrite the rules of Cosa Nostra. But no one man is bigger than the Mafia, and for Joe Colombo, defiance came with a bullet. The rise and fall of Joe Colombo shows us that in organized crime, even the boldest figures are only one step away from betrayal, prison, or death. If you found this deep dive into Mafia history fascinating, don't forget to like this video, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories from the hidden corners of history and Mafia.